I'm Scott Honeycutt, and I'm with Henry Hahn from One Body Life. This is the 6th video in a series entitled Alpha Ekklesia. Today we're going to be talking about the difference between church and Ekklesia. Please join us as we discuss this very important topic. So, Henry, what did Jesus mean when he said, I will build my Ekklesia? What was he talking about?
Now, this word ekklesia has been mistranslated in the English version to church. So most people would understand from Matthew 16 said when Jesus says, I will build my church. But in the Greek word is actually ekklesia.
Okay.
So we're going to make a distinction between church and ekklesia as we move forward in this video.
Okay.
But this matter is really critical because, Jesus said this after he asked the disciples, who do you say that I am? And Simon, he declared, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God.
Yes.
And of course, Jesus said, well, blessed are you, right? Because flesh and blood did not reveal this, but my Father in heaven. But then Jesus continued. He didn't stop there. He says, and I say also to you. And so by saying and, he's making a continuation of the revelation. So Peter, you got a revelation of who I am. Now I'm going to continue that revelation and tell you what I'm doing. Okay, what I'm going to do. I'm going to build my ekklesia. In fact, I'm going to change your name to Peter, a stone, and you're going to be now a stone in this building, a member in this building of my ekklesia. So, and the gates of Hades, he continued, the gates of Hades shall not prevail against my built up ekklesia. So that's why this matter, this phrase there, I will build my ekklesia, is so critical in the entire revelation of Christ and what he is doing.
Yes. At the same time, though, Jesus only mentioned this word, ekklesia, 2 times. Once in Matthew chapter 16 and once in Matthew chapter 18. So it makes you wonder, well, how often was it mentioned in the New Testament? Was it that common?
Is it that important, right? If it's only mentioned twice.
Yeah.
Well, in the New Testament, turned out the rest of the Acts and epistles and Revelation, 120 times, something like that, right? Was mentioned total. And, compare that to grace. Grace was mentioned 125 times, something like that. So, we, as Christians, we love the word grace because grace is what Christ has given us.
Sure.
And yet, here is ekklesia. It's just at the same, mentioned about the same amount of time as grace. So that's how important. If you love grace, then you should love ekklesia, okay?
And one of those was in Ephesians chapter 1, that his ekklesia would fill the body. That Christ's body is
his ekklesia. Yeah, so, throughout the New Testament, ekklesia really has a prominence. In fact, ekklesia is spoken as God's eternal purpose. And so in Ephesians chapter 1, as you mentioned, it says the ekklesia is his body. The ekklesia is his body, the body of the one who fills all in all. And then you go to chapter 3, ekklesia is the one who is the one who displays, right, the wisdom of God, the multifarious wisdom of God, multifaceted wisdom of God. And also it's in the ekklesia that God gets the glory. So ekklesia is also the one who will defeat the enemy. The gates of hell cannot prevail against the offense of the ekklesia. Yeah. So ekklesia is huge. In fact, ekklesia is the New Jerusalem. So, we think we're going to, of course, heaven and so forth.
Sure.
But really, the New Jerusalem in Hebrews tells us the New Jerusalem is the ekklesia.
Well, let's back up a little bit. So when Jesus first said, I will build my ekklesia, what did the disciples hear? What was the concept of ekklesia that they would have understood that we might not have understood?
Ekklesia was a widely practiced forum during the days of Jesus. In fact, Ekklesia was founded by the Greeks about 600 years before Christ, before BC, right? And Ekklesia was the forum used for the Greeks' invention of democracy. So it was an assembly of the citizens of the city-state, and they would come together and they would have free speech and debating an issue. And then after their debate, they would vote or legislate. And so that was democracy. That was people rule, right? And so when the Roman Empire took over the Greek Empire, they continued the practice of Ekklesia for the city, city government, you might say.
Sure.
And so when Jesus said, "I will build mine," in a way, nobody questioned what it was because they knew what it was, but except that now he's saying, "You guys have yours, I'm going to build mine." Okay. The world, you guys have your democracy and supposedly to be the best form of government, but now I'm going to build mine and I'm going to give a contrast.
Right. So, what is this idea of his eternal purpose? The Ekklesia is Jesus' eternal purpose.
Well, because, we saw in Ephesians chapter 3, it actually used that term eternal purpose was used there. It says that the Ekklesia will show to Satan and all his, following angels and minions, right? That the multifaceted wisdom of God. It's through the Ekklesia that they will recognize God's multifarious wisdom. And Paul continued to say, according to the eternal purpose, God's eternal purpose. So Ekklesia is something eternal that, like we mentioned earlier, it's the New Jerusalem, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but another thing you say is that this mistranslation is one of the greatest, or perhaps the greatest, conspiracy in history. Can you speak to that a little bit? That's kind of a strong statement.
Yeah, well, when William Tyndale was the first translator of the entire English Bible from Greek to English, and when he translated the Bible, he translated Ekklesia to congregation, a congregating of an assembly of people. Well, the Roman Church at that time objected. In fact, they vehemently objected, and so much so that if they threatened him that you have to change this word not from congregation to church. It has to be church. Well, Tyndale refused. He says, that is not church. That is not church. That is a congregation of people. And so because he refused, he died for it. The Roman Church killed him and then burned him at the stake after he was murdered. And so somehow it was so important for Tyndale to be accurate, and his accuracy was that was not church. Ekklesia was not church, is not church. So I would rather die than to make a mistranslation. And then 80 years later, King James had his authorized version. He authorized a translation. And that authorized version, or King James Version, he had 11 rules. And rule number 3 is that Ekklesia has to be translated to church and not congregation or assembly. And then you would say, well, they lifted, the 43 translated, they lifted about 85% of, maybe even more, of the King James Version is actually from Tyndale, but they changed the word, right?
Yeah.
Congregation, which was Tyndale's word, to church. Then you'll say, why? So that's why I'm saying conspiracy, right? There's a deception going on. There's a deception going on. And the reason is because church, if you look it up in the dictionary, etymology, the etymology of this word church is literally the building. Church is the building, okay? And so those that are more, have more understanding, they'll always have to redefine the word. They'll say, well, church is not the building, it's the people. No, church is literally the building, not the people.
Sure.
So then what was the purpose? Why did the Roman Church and King James wanted that word to be church and not ecclesia or people?
Yeah.
Well, because whoever owns the building, well, Roman Church owned all the churches in Europe, pretty much, right? And King James, as the head of the Anglican Church, owned all the churches in England. So they have a, built-in, desire, to have their subjects, the people, the populace, go to church. Why? Because whoever owns the church controls what is taught in that church. It's clear, right? If you're the owner of the building, then you determine what is taught in that building and how to interpret the Bible in that building. And so they wanted the populace to be under, you might say, under their interpretation or the control of their interpretation of the Bible.
Okay. So then today, what's the difference between church and ecclesia? How do we bridge this gap between church and what are some differences, some key elements that are still in play today?
Well, churches, well, first praise God that there are now thousands of churches.
Yes.
That believers can go to, not just the Roman Church, back 600 years ago, or the Anglican Church if you're in England. I mean, now you can go to basically the church of your choice, where you can receive the teachings of the Bible, the preaching of Jesus Christ, and inspiration, through music and through preaching and so forth. So, today, we have the freedom to go to all the different kinds of churches, right? Baptist, Pentecostal, independent, et cetera, et cetera. Sure. So that's good, right? That's good. But still, it's still controlled by the owner of that building. In other words, you cannot go into any church building and try to disrupt what is being taught in that building. Okay, you cannot say something different to say, hey, what is being taught here is wrong, right? I have a different opinion, right? Speaking in tongue is wrong. There's a Pentecostal church. You cannot go into a Pentecostal church and say, speaking in tongue is wrong. Let me tell you about, why. Well, they would say, thank you, but go to the Baptist church, for example, right? Go to another church, right? So it's still the difference is that there are many churches, but what is still the same is that whoever owns the building, the church, controls what is being taught there. Whereas ecclesia, being the democracy of the Lord Jesus, is a place where all kinds of believers, no matter which perspective you're from, what church you go to, right? We need to come together, or the Lord wants to build us together in his ecclesia, that in his diversity, in this diversity of his people, he can show off the oneness of his people and the love for each other. Right? Because he is living in us. He's living in us. Therefore, we love one another, even though we are very different. And what a contrast that is between the Lord's ecclesia, the Lord's democracy, and the world, right? Here's the world, right? Witness the world's democracy today, right?
Sure.
Full of, bickering, not just bickering, but hatred, even division, corruption, right? You can't be with those that are so different. You just don't want to. You feel uncomfortable. But in the Lord's ecclesia, there's even more diversity. Right. But
because we have all those differences in addition to our denominational differences and doctrinal differences. I mean, we have all the racial differences and add everything else too. I mean, there's just a lot of divisions.
A lot of divisions, right? Or differences.
Differences.
But yet, here we are. And as the Lord's ecclesia, we care for one another, we love one another, and we are one. And that's why the ecclesia in the New Testament is called a lampstand, right? It's a shining lampstand in this dark world. It's the light of the light in the world, because when the world looks at the Ekklesia, they'll say, wow, they're astounded. They say, wow, how could this be possible? That all these different kinds of people, they could be opposing each other outside the Ekklesia, but in the Ekklesia, they're loving one another. How is that possible? They would say, Jesus must be real.
Jesus must be real. Yeah. Jesus said that they will see that you're one and they will believe. The world will see that you're one and you will believe. Yeah.
You know?
But we don't see that as much with church, because church actually kind of has a negative connotation for a lot of people. Jesus doesn't, but church certainly does. It's seemingly.
That's true. That is true. I mean, Jesus, in fact, they did a survey, and Jesus has favorability is like 85, 90% favorability. Sure. But when they say, well, what do you think about church? And boom, it goes way below 50%, right? Yeah. Because church has a bad connotation, for all the different kinds of reasons. But the Lord's Ekklesia, what the Lord wants to build, his Ekklesia, is a light on the hill. It's a lampstand. When people see the Ekklesia in action, in practicality, they will be, wow. Yeah. Wow, I want Jesus. I want to be part of Jesus, because the Ekklesia is the testimony of who Jesus is.
Well, just to be clear, so what is the role of church today? Let's be clear. There is a role that church plays.
Yeah, right.
What is that role?
Well, the role of the churches today is the house, right? The house for all the various ministries, from what God has put into their heart, pastors, ministers, they put in their heart. But what is these gifted pastors, these gifted members, gifted ministers, what are they to do? So Ephesians 4 tells us that these fivefold gifts, you might say, right? These gifted ministers, apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, right? Yeah. What are they to do? They are to equip the saints. Yes, they are to teach in a way of equipping all the common believers, so that for a purpose, so that the common believers can be activated and come into unity with each other. Yeah. They can come into fellowship with each other. And that is the building up of the body of Christ. And that is maturity. So yes, there is a role for ministries in the churches. Their role is to equip the saints, not to hold on to the believers and say, okay, now you belong to me, right? Okay, you're a Baptist, you belong to me as the Baptist church, or you're Pentecost, you belong to me. No, I'm going to equip you, right? Now go and fellowship, with the Baptist, with the Pentecostal, with the Catholic believer, right? I'm equipping you so that you can fellowship with all kinds of believers.
And express the oneness so that the world would believe, right? That's the idea.
That's right. So so ministries in the churches definitely they have a role.
Absolutely. So, but let's go on the other side. What if we just have church and we don't have Ekklesia? We don't have an expression of that Ekklesia. What are we missing out on?
Well, that is today. Today, since for the last 1,000, well, actually almost 1,300 years, okay, is what is prominent is churches.
Yeah, right? Since Constantine, for the most part.
Since Constantine, for the most part. Yeah. Churches are prominent. And where is Ekklesia? It's been obscured. It's hidden. Yeah. Where is the group of diverse believers can freely come together and be who they are without trying to, without feeling like they need to be converted or be uniform and conform, and they can fellowship. Where is that forum? Yeah. Well, it's been hidden. So this is why we're providing this series of 8 videos to bring into light, right? To bring into light what is already in the scriptures. We didn't invent this, right? It's in the scriptures. No. And there's a heart, there's the desire in believers for Ekklesia.
And we're seeing this in Nigeria. We're seeing this in the Philippines. We're seeing this hunger.
In this country.
In this country, in this state, even
In this
California.
state, even the Bay Area.
We're seeing a hunger for this oneness. And people see it in the scriptures. I see it in the scriptures. My eyes have been opened, and I'm changed of my perspective of what the church and the Ekklesia is.
Yeah.
So let's just wrap some things up for this video. And what are some takeaways that we can take away just from this discussion today?
Well, the takeaway is really to understand there is a difference between churches, as we know of, and Ekklesia, the Lord's Ekklesia. That is so important because without understanding these, that they are different. One is a ministry, one is a house for many, many different kinds of ministries for the sake of building up the Lord's Ekklesia, right? So that is just so clear. And I would say if you could see that, and you will see that the takeaway, that our salvation or our revelation of who Jesus is for the Ekklesia. Okay? When you saw Jesus, when you started this journey as a Christian, that journey leads to Ekklesia. In fact, that's the very next thing in the same revelation is, I will build my Ekklesia. That's what Jesus said.
Henry, I'm just so excited to be able to be a part of this ministry and to be a part of getting this word out. So thank you so much. And thank you as well. I hope that you will join us as we talk about the next topic, which is diversity is necessary in the Ekklesia. Thank you very much.